As we begin our service, we acknowledge that the land on which we gather is a traditional meeting ground and home of many indigenous peoples. And we recognize that the very specific land that we at Westwood are on here was promised to be set aside for the Papachase First Nations, who were signers of Treaty 6. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are with us today, those who have gone before us and the youth who inspire us, a tradition that dates back for centuries. Land recognition now calls us to acknowledge that we are Treaty 6 people, to remember our responsibility to deepen our understanding of the treaty, to participate in and support the ongoing process of truth, reconciliation, and healing. Tansei, hello, bonjour. Welcome to Westwood. A special welcome this morning to those who are with us for the first time, or to consider themselves newcomers, or are returning after an extended absence. Westwood is a compassionate Unitarian Universalist community where you are welcome to explore your spiritual beliefs and decide for yourself what they may or may not be, where you are welcome regardless of your gender, who you love, your wealth, or your education, where reverence for the earth and belief in the dignity of every person inform our ethics, where music is an expression of our joy, where worship brings us together to celebrate what is important in our lives, and where justice acts as a symbol of our hope. Westwood is a welcoming community where you are invited to rest, grow, and serve the world. My name is Carl Ulrich. My pronouns are he and him. I am your service leader this morning, and I am glad that you have joined us today, either in person or on Zoom. Our speaker this morning is Ron Ensom. I will introduce him more later, who will be speaking to us from Ottawa on Zoom. Our accompanist is Carrie Day, and our multi-platform team is Hannah and Bill and Jacqueline this morning. After the service, we invite you to visit and discuss any questions you may have. And also a reminder that today is our potluck Sunday, so everyone is invited to stay for lunch. And if you didn't bring food, we still have plenty, so don't be shy, please stay. To receive information about our upcoming services and events, please sign the guest book in the back on the table in the back and include your email address. You may also sign up to receive the newsletter on our website. For our first hymn, I Seek the Spirit of the Child. If you would please join in singing with your mask on. And it's a new tune for us, I believe. So play it once through, I think, Carrie. candles of joy and concern are a tradition in our Universalist Unitarian congregations across Canada and the U.S. It gives us an opportunity to both hear and to express something important that is going on in our lives, to celebrate what brings us joy, and to share what is weighing in our hearts. For those of us who are online, please raise your hand so that we can acknowledge you. If we can see the screen of those online. And for those in the building, you're invited to come forward and speak and then light your candle as the next person speaks. You can also light a candle in silence. We'll begin with those who are online. Will you join me in the affirmation that's on the screen? May light these candles inspire us to use our power, to help and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to serve the spirit of truth in loving affection and trusting hope. Each week during our Sunday service, we take a few minutes to acknowledge the gifts we bring to and receive from our compassionate community. Gifts of talent, time, and treasure. Today, we are blessed with the musical talent of Carrie, as well as the gifts of time and service from those who plan, greet, coordinate our sound and video systems, and those who clean up after, and those who make coffee for us, David. If you wish to make a gift of treasure, the information for doing so is on the right-hand side of the slide. And if you'll join me in singing. I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. You I receive, I give, share, and from this we live. For our second hymn today, we have May I Be Filled with Loving Kindness. And with your mask on, please join us in singing. I think play it one through. I think this is another one. We found songs that fit with our theme today, but they're not all ones that we're familiar with. They have some great words. We're really pleased to have our speaker today, Ron, with us, even if he is coming in from Ottawa, just the wonders of technology. Ron has a MSW in social work, and as both a professional and as a volunteer, has pursued a lifelong interest in children and families, child poverty, family violence, and child maltreatment. His work spans child welfare, resolving service barriers for hard-to-serve children, pediatric hospital and community management of child abuse and neglect. He has written a book on child sexual abuse, collaborated in developing the Canadian Joint Statement on Shaken Body Syndrome, and an educational video on abusive head trauma. He co-authored the Canadian Joint Statement on Physical Punishment of Children and Youth, which is one of the issues we'll be talking about today. He has a long life involvement and with camp and community-based skill development programs for children disadvantaged by poverty. Among the awards he has received for his work and leadership are the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, Canadian Institute of Child Health Promotion and Innovation Award of Excellence, and Canadian Volunteer Award Certificate of Merit. So it's my real pleasure to present Ron Ensom to you.
I'd like to begin by lighting one candle for the children of the earth and those fortunate enough to live in kind, protective families, and those unfortunate to live in places where there is so much harm, terrible climate change effects, and the worst things that humans do to each other. I'm thinking about Ukraine. We are doing our best to support some Ukrainian sisters-in-law who are here in Ottawa with their young children. I want to thank you, Carl, and Westwood Unitarian Society for this opportunity to talk about the well-being of children. I will apologize now for the sneezing I might do. I got a terrible snootful of cold a couple of days ago. And I want to tell you just a little bit about me. I'm always curious to know how speakers come to stand before us. And my career, my professional career and personal commitments have had to do with children in recreational settings, child welfare, and as you heard, in a pediatric hospital here in Ottawa. I want to say, to frame my presentation today, that physical abuse of children is frankly an epidemic that is really still quite unrecognized, and that the most common experience of violence amongst the children of the world, and here in Canada, is physical or corporal punishment of children by parents and others who care for them. I'll just hold up for you the Canadian Joint Statement on Physical Punishment of Children that Carl mentioned as he introduced me, and I will get on with today's presentation. I think most of you would recognize this as a photo of a young girl who is replaying what she has experienced in her, most likely in her family. Common expression we have all heard is spare the child, let me try that again, spare the rod and spoil the child. And that expression, and that somewhat confused expression of what we have all believed, or many of us have believed, has roots in the Bible, particularly in Proverbs. But here is where it actually comes from, as worded in a poem called Hudibras by Samuel Butler, who wrote this poem as a spoof on the Puritans. If matrimony and hanging go by destiny, why not whipping too? What medicine else can cure the fits of lovers when they see their wits? Love is a boy, by poets styled, then spare the rod and spoil the child. A useful definition of physical or corporal punishment, as it's still called by many, is this: any punishment in which physical force is used and intended to cause some degree of pain or discomfort, however light. The rationale, mechanism, and risks of physical punishment of children are simply to hit a child. That includes spanking, in order to hurt the child, to correct or control the child, and that results in broad and enduring personal and societal harm. Two common beliefs about physical punishment, which are often cited by opponents of giving up the right, as some people think of it, for parents to hit children, to hurt them, in the hope that it's a useful experience for them. These two major common beliefs are that physical punishment is an effective and necessary method of socialization, and that physical punishment is not child abuse. The two can be clearly distinguished. Now, as long ago as 30 years, we were generating very, very solid research on the consequences of children experiencing physical punishment. And some of the most valuable pieces of research are meta-analyses in which a researcher who knows his or her stuff, in this case, gathers together the solidly designed and honestly reported research findings on aspects of a phenomenon. And here is what Elizabeth Gershoff produced in 2016 with the assistance of many other researchers who preceded her and still work hard on this issue around the world. First of all, there is no evidence, no credible, rational evidence from research that spanking is associated with improved child behavior, which is, of course, is what many parents who would hit their child would tell you they are attempting to do. There is very clear, rationally irrefutable evidence that spanking is associated with increased risk of 10 detrimental childhood outcomes. Physical abuse, as most people would see it, aggression, antisocial behavior, externalizing behaviors, acting out, internalizing behaviors, mental health, inward troubles, mental health problems, negative relationships with parents, it's associated with moral internalization, lower cognitive ability, and lower self-esteem. There is clear evidence that spanking is associated with an increased risk of 3 detrimental adult outcomes. Pardon me, my tongue is sticking to the roof of my mouth. Antisocial behavior, mental health problems, and adult support for physical punishment. Here is some more recent research that bullying, something almost every educator and so many parents are concerned about, is a common externalizing behavior associated with physical punishment. Children learn what they experience. Negative outcomes of physical punishment are not moderated by race and ethnicity as once asserted. This is still an argument meant to derail changes in law and parenting. Maternal warmth does not moderate the link between spanking and increased child aggression over time as once asserted. So a mother who apparently, on most views, is warm with her children, but who hits them to discipline them and teach them to respect people, that warmth does not moderate the harm of physical punishment of her hitting her children. Physical punishment predicts slower cognitive development in young children. There is a dose response. This finding in particular, I think, has caused many parents who were perhaps ambivalent about hitting their children to think long and hard about it, because they are hearing now that hitting their children can harm the child's normal, natural cognitive development. There is a strong correlation between interpersonal violence and physical punishment of children. Physical punishment adversely affects, as I said a moment ago, a child's developing brain. This is now beyond challenge. And that child abuse, neglect, and exposure to other traumatic stressors, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, as we are hearing so commonly these days, are common and strongly linked to a multitude of health and social problems. Here is a graphic developed by PrevNet, an organization of Canadian professionals that became concerned about the genesis and the outcomes of bullying, dating, aggression, marital abuse. You can see how that bullying experience can follow a child and adolescent and adult through their life. Physical punishment, of course, is one of those antecedent experiences that lies right at the beginning of bullying. To date, 65 countries, 65 states have, in legal terms, in law and in policy, banned the physical punishment of children in all settings. That means in parental homes, schools, and other care settings. 52 to date, and more every year. Did I say 52? I should have said 65. I'm going to just speed through the names of the countries that have to date prohibited physical punishment in all settings. One or two of these countries may catch your eye, and I think some of them may strike you as countries that many Canadians would feel we are far more progressive than. Certainly not the case in Canada on this issue. Scotland and Wales are the most recent entities that have prohibited physical punishment of children. They can't be credited as being countries because they are not states within Britain. 27 more countries have expressed a commitment to ban physical punishment. Canada is not among them. Those 27 are adjudged to have firmly committed. I will just show you quickly some history of Canadian law. Criminal code, as you know, is federal law. And we received our criminal code from the English common law. It was codified as the criminal code in 1892. The law was blind once, as you all know, to the assault of wives by husbands until the 1980s. Penal law permitted corporal punishment of prisoners until 1972, and by masters of apprentices until 1955. The courts as punishment for various crimes until 1972. Ship's masters of anyone aboard ship until 2001. And the Criminal Code of Canada still permits, I'm going to spend some time on this, corporal punishment of children by parents and those acting in the place of parents. Here is that section of our criminal code. Every school teacher, parent, or person standing in the place of a parent is justified in using force by way of correction toward a pupil or child, as the case may be, who is under his care, if the force does not exceed what is reasonable under the circumstances. This is still in our criminal code and operates as a defense for a parent, teacher, frankly, who would be charged with assault. And we are still saddled with it. Children are saddled with it today. The government of Canada has never tabled legislation to repeal Section 43 of the Criminal Code, despite the fact that 65 other countries are leading the way on this. The government of Canada has opposed the 3 court challenges of the constitutionality of Section 43, the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, the Court of Appeal for Ontario, and finally, and lastly, the Supreme Court of Canada. The government of Canada actively opposed the first 16 of the 19 private members' bills to repeal or amend Section 43. This doesn't augur well for the current private members' bills that are before the Senate and the House of Commons, but we think there is a much better chance of those bills resulting in the repeal of Section 43. Here is a list of the 19 private members' bills to repeal Section 43 that have been tabled over 33 years. The first was in 1989. The last two were in the House of Commons in May and the Senate in June of this year. You are all familiar, I know, with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and their calls to action. Here, I think you would be interested to see is what our Supreme Court, which has been roundly criticized by legal scholars, decided that Canadian courts and judges should be guided by when they are hearing charges against a parent or teacher or someone else providing care of a child. The court decided in 2004 in a split 6-3 decision. Though finding Section 43 constitutional, the Supreme Court of Canada narrowed the definition of who may use physical punishment, on what ages, body parts, and capacities of children, by what means, with what force, and in what circumstances. Only parents may use reasonable physical punishment. Teachers may use reasonable force only to remove a child from a classroom or to secure compliance with instructions, but not merely as corporal punishment. Only children older than 2 and not yet teenagers may be physically punished. This is just a crazy, crazy restriction on the scope of Section 43. All children, those under 2 and those older than 2 learn something and are harmed by physical punishment. The use of force on children incapable of learning from it because of disability or some other contextual factor is not protected. All children are capable of learning something from their experiences. Only minor corrective force of a transitory and trifling nature may be used. These are the parameters. These are the new limits that the Supreme Court said Canadian courts must interpret charges of assault against a parent or teacher. Discipline by the use of objects or blows or slaps to the head is unreasonable. Degrading, inhuman, or harmful conduct is not protected. Of course, being hit by another human being when you are young and small and dependent is absolutely degrading. The physical punishment must be correct, which rules out conduct stemming from the caregiver's frustration, loss of temper, or abusive personality. Now, solid research has shown that almost every time a parent, for instance, hits a child, they do so in anger. The gravity of the precipitating event is not relevant. This is a condition that applies in almost every charge under the criminal code. And the question of what is reasonable under the circumstances requires an objective test and must be considered in context in light of all the circumstances of the case. This is what a leading Canadian scholar, professor of law in Western Canada said after she read this decision. When you're under 12 and over 2, it doesn't matter what you do. The judge says they can beat on you, but not on the head or if they're mad, and not with a stick and not too bad, and just if they're your mom and dad. Now, law, of course, operates at provincial and territorial levels. And this is a chart that shows a little bit about how unevenly physical punishment is prohibited across Canada. In education, it is prohibited in the Education Acts of all but 2 provinces. I'm sorry to tell you, those of you in Alberta, That's your province in Manitoba. In child care, it's prohibited in all but one province. We're still working on New Brunswick. In foster care, it's prohibited in 5 provinces in BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. In the penal system, in all provinces and territories as a sentence, as you heard already, or as a disciplinary measure. And it is not reportable in to any child welfare authority in any province or territory. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child frames the conditions under which every country that has ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Canada ratified the convention in 1991. It's now ratified by every country in the world except the USA. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, which monitors the progress that countries around the world are making on honoring their commitments in signing or ratifying the convention, has stressed that corporal punishment of children is incompatible with the convention. It said in June of 2006, this is quite a powerful statement based on research, addressing the widespread acceptance or tolerance of corporal punishment of children and eliminating it in the family, schools, and other settings is not only an obligation of states parties under the convention, it's also a key strategy for reducing and preventing all forms of violence in societies. Now, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child reviews every country's compliance with the commitments it makes in ratifying the convention every 5 years. And Canada has appeared before the committee 5 times, in 1995 and in 2003 and in 2012. And most recently in 2022, the CRC, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, has pleaded with Canada, urged Canada to repeal Section 43 of the Criminal Code of Canada, which provides protection for those who would assault a child. Not protection, it provides to adults who assault adults. And the beat goes on with regard to Section 43. In April of 2007, pardon me, a UN committee, a Canadian Senate committee toured Canada and had hearings on effective implementation of Canada's internal obligations with respect to all the rights of children. And that committee, after touring Canada and hearing what so many leading scholars and parents and thinkers said, that Section 43, the Criminal Code of Canada, should be repealed. You may remember the Millennium Goals that were established for all the nations of the world who are part of the UN, and that's almost all of them. And the Millennium Goals were replaced just a few years ago by the Sustainable Development Goals achieved by all countries under UN guidance, agreed to make this world a more sustainable, environmentally friendly, and safer place for people. And with regard to physical punishment of children, Section 40, Sustainable Development Goal 16.2 says, and abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against and torture of children. And there are 3 indicators that the UN tracks in relation to our progress on 16.2. 16.2.1 indicator is the proportion of children aged 1 to 17, not under 2, not over 16, proportion of children aged 1 to 17 who experienced any physical punishment or psychological aggression by caregivers in the last month. Why do we need to take action on Section 43? Because physical punishment is harmful to children growing up, their partners, their children, their families, and their communities. It's a violation of their human rights, not child rights, human rights that children share with adults. And it's an economic burden on society. The avenues for action are to communicate the evidence. We would all call it education in many forms, in many ways, and repealing Section 43 of the Criminal Code, which is the fundamental support in Canada for the continuing physical punishment of children. We need to amend those remaining provincial education acts, Manitoba and Alberta. And we need to address physical punishment in provincial and territorial child protection legislation. There is a picture of the Canadian Joint Statement on Physical Punishment of Children and Youth. I believe that Carl has a copy of that. The conclusion reached by those of us who wrote with a lot of assistance the joint statement, which we published in 2004, is that research evidence now available permits us to move beyond the debate about whether physical punishment is harmful to children or youth or is even effective as discipline. There was ample research evidence in 2004 for us to write the conclusion, and that stands in the Canadian Joint Statements, which continues to be distributed across Canada. And we said on the basis of the clear and compelling evidence that physical punishment of children and youth plays no useful role in their upbringing and poses only risks to their development, that parents should be strongly encouraged to develop alternative and positive approaches to discipline. It always should be said that children need discipline. They need discipline which is respectful, which achieves the good goals that parents have for their children and is not harmful. The core recommendations of the joint statement were the delivery of public awareness messages to inform all Canadians that physical punishment is harmful to children's development and is ineffective as discipline, the development of universal parenting education, and the provision of the same protection of children from physical assault as given to Canadian adults and to children in a growing number of countries. That was a more general and polite way of saying in 2004, we need to repeal Section 43 of our Criminal Code of Canada. And finally, here is a list of the faith endorsements of the joint statements to date. I think there are 20 there. You will see highlighted in yellow near the top of the list that the Canadian Unitarian Council has endorsed the joint statement. That was a most welcome endorsement. And highlighted in yellow at the bottom of the list is an invitation from me and my colleagues to Westwood Unitarian Society to endorse the joint statement. I guess I now go to stop sharing and to join Carl and you and Bill and Dick Chamney, who I see on my screen out there in Edmonton, to have a conversation, if you would like, about this issue.
If we have any questions or comments, brief comments from people, and we'll start with the Zoom people. Is there anyone from Zoom who would like to make a comment or ask a question?
I see Dick Chamney's hand.
Go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, good to see you in Alberta again, Ron. You're aware of my special interest in children based in school settings. And you and I have convinced, I think, 5 or 6 and up to 9 now school jurisdictions, independent ones, to endorse the joint statement in Alberta. But there are 65 school jurisdictions and 9 isn't really good enough. And I'm wondering, how does our endorsement and bullying or endorsement of the joint statement stack up against the rest of Canada? My particular interest is currently is bullying. That's an epidemic in schools. And more recently with the introduction of cyberbullying, things have really expanded greatly, and there's damage being done. Can you comment on that, how we stack up against the rest of the country?
Dick, I'd be happy to. Alberta stacks up fairly well, despite what most or too many Easterners think about the rednecks in Alberta. I'll say it.
Yeah.
And I think you were right, Dick, that 63 school boards across Canada, school boards or divisions, as they're variously called, have at the trustee level, at the board level, formally endorsed a joint statement, which I think represents a great deal of courage, given how there are no teachers' federations yet that have endorsed the joint statement. Many years ago, teachers' federations quite understandably and quite naturally decided that Section 43 needed to be kept on the books to protect teachers from unfortunate and unfounded charges of assault when, for instance, a teacher would pull one child away from another because it was the only means that that teacher had at that point in time to protect that child. But over the years, I will say candidly, that once natural and understandable concern about the vulnerability teachers would have if Section 43 wasn't kept in place, I think the Canadian Teachers Federation, which rules the roost with provincial teachers federations, has, as a matter of reputation and territorial integrity, maintained their opposition to Section 43. I think that they may be deciding now that they have painted themselves into a corner, because the Canadian Teachers Federation, like every provincial and a local teachers federation, has pronounced for the books that they're not in support of parents or teachers, of course, hitting children with a view to correcting their behavior. So once the CTF, the Canadian Teachers Federation, decides to get out of the corner they have painted themselves into and supports, frankly, the two private members' bills that are currently before the Senate and the House, I think children in this country in school systems will be much better protected, because the law has always supported, good law has always supported good educational policy in school boards and in various schools. Sorry for the long-winded response, Dick.
I liked it. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you, Ron. Are there any comments or questions from the room here?
I'm Jerry Shaw.
Hi, Gary.
Hi. I agree with most of what is said there, but I would like to bring to your attention that there are some other activities and sayings, so forth, that are just the opposite. What do you do with a person who has been declared under the 2013 decision for DMDD, dysregulated
Behavior, dysregulated behavior. We're
What?
hearing that phrase a lot these days.
Dysregulated behavior.
Yes, dysregulated behavior. Now, I have a grandson who is 12, just 12. And I was surprised just the other day how much he has grown in terms of height and mental capacity. Now, we also hear that humans, particularly men, don't really achieve maximum growth in mental capability until they're 25. So now I'm a statistician, so I accept a lot of variability around all sorts of claims. But the one thing I noticed this morning about all those countries that have declared no more spanking children, and I'd been spanked 2 or 3 times at least.
Many of us have.
But I still agree with what the conclusion is now. So I just bring that to your attention. I'd like to see all those countries go back and look at all their cases and see where they can find the DMDD individuals to separate them, because I think there's a lot of confusion in the whole process.
I guess my best answer to your question is with a question. Why would anybody think that you would teach anything useful to a dysregulated child or adolescent who is hitting other children or adolescents by hitting them and hurting them, by modeling for them the very violence that we want to discourage them from using? It just doesn't make any common sense, and it doesn't make any sense in any of the research that's been done. Children learn what they experience. If a child experiences being hit, a regulated or dysregulated child, they are far more likely to repeat it than a child who has never experienced hitting and has no reason to reflect their own childhood experience of being hit and hurt. In some ways, it's no more complicated than that.
I think we have another comment here. Lorraine.
I would just like to say, as president of this congregation, that I'm quite prepared for us to bring this to our annual general meeting in May, and that we could make a motion to join that list of people who'd like to see Section 43 repealed.
So great.
Well, that's wonderful news. And by way of numbers for the gentleman statistician, he should know that 673 respected Canadian organizations have to date endorsed the joint statement. That's after reviewing the research and discussions at their boards, and some of those discussions would have been vigorous. 673 Canadian organizations in health, recreation, education. The school boards that Dick mentioned are among those 673. So when folks take the time to look at the research evidence and maybe to reflect on their own experience as children and their own parenting views and practices, continuing to hit children in the belief that it's a useful experience for them makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Okay, we have another question.
Hi, my name's Khalid Aziz. Thanks for the presentation. It was great. I just wonder whether you could comment on the perspective that some people bring, which is that we're criminalizing corporal punishment. And I don't think that's the intent. By removing Section 43, all we're doing is changing the protection from protecting the person committing the violence to the person receiving it. But maybe you could make a comment on that.
I'd be happy to. And you have asked a critical question. And that belief that parents who would, with the best of intentions, be charged with assaulting their child, as might be sort of observed in a shopping center, that simply doesn't happen in any of the countries that have prohibited physical punishment of children. It has not happened in the countries that have systematically tracked what happens to children and families and parents when those countries have prohibited physical punishment of children. It simply doesn't happen. There has been no increased child welfare action, that would be apprehensions of children by the state in many people's minds. There have simply not been any more criminal charging of parents in countries like New Zealand, one of the first to prohibit and track, than was feared by many. That in the end is actually a very effective derailer of efforts to repeal Section 43. It's not real. It hasn't happened where it's been done and measured. But boy, it sure is a very effective derailer of discussions. What parent, for instance, would want to believe that if they lost their cool, and remember, most parents who hit their children are doing so in anger, what parent would want to think that if they lost their cool and smacked their child at the shopping center or in a church basement, that they could be charged? Well, that's a reasonable fear, but it's not founded in evidence. And remember, hitting a child just models violence. Why would anybody, once they're aware of the evidence, once they think about children having the same human rights as adults yet, should have the same protection? You hit an adult in a shopping center, you hit an adult in a church basement, you might be charged. Why should you not be charged if it's serious enough for hitting a child in any of those settings?
Great. Well, I think this has been really, really good. Really appreciate your being with us, Ron.
Thank you once again for the invitation. This has been a wonderful experience for me and a lot of fun learning how to present on Zoom.
Yes, that's we're all learning, that's for sure.
That's for sure.
Good. Well, our last hymn will be Go Now in Peace. Our closing words are from Marianne Hatchin Cotter. May this ending be our beginning. Let us begin again and again, to wonder and to cherish and to act, so that at day's end we will be content, knowing that we have given our best to life.
Green and red roses too, I see them bloom for me and for you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day and the dark sacred night, and I think to myself, What a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I see babies cry, and I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll ever know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yes, I think to myself, what a wonderful